stories. Basically, what we will be encountering, re-encountering, telling, and retelling are many stories. Now, I wanted to say briefly something about stories, and in this context, I threw in a new picture by Waterhouse of Cleopatra. She's probably closer to the, well, actually, they're not that bad. They're fairly similar. Cleopatra, as you undoubtedly know, was Greek, a rather formidable lady. And she stands in our imagination because of this guy, who you know as William Shakespeare. Okay, so briefly, stories. How many of you have seen the film Shakespeare in Love?
Yeah.
Pretty much everybody. How many of you studied Romeo and Juliet in high school? Pretty much everybody. Were any of you bothered by the premise of the film? Had you studied it carefully in high school, you should have been profoundly bothered by the premise of the film. What is the premise of the film? Okay, that's a rhetorical question. I'll answer it. It's that the matter of this extraordinary poem, Romeo and Juliet, emerges rather directly out of the immediate experiences of the author, right? That's the premise. Okay. Had you paid attention in high school, you would have known that prior to Shakespeare writing his play, there were already two English versions of the same story several decades earlier. And those English versions themselves are indebted to at least 4 Italian versions of the same story. And the story, in fact, is a retelling of a retelling of a retelling written down that goes not just to Dante, and it does. There is one of his passages in his great tripartite poem refers more or less to similar events, but it is itself ultimately indebted to an ancient story going all the way back to Ovid, a first century BC, first century AD Roman poet who is undoubtedly retelling the story. So why does Shakespeare's version stay with us? Because of how the story is told. It's not just the particulars of the story. So similarly, Julius Caesar exists in the Western imagination not only as an important historical figure, and surely he's very important, many of his actions shape our lives today, not the least of which is his calendar. Basically, our calendar is the calendar he instituted in 46 BC, which was inspired by his visit to Egypt, where he also got to know Cleopatra rather well. They had a child who was Cleopatra's co-ruler when Antony came on the scene. And the drama of Caesar's death and its consequences exist in our culture in many ways above and beyond because of Shakespeare's retelling of this Roman story. Now, each one of these paintings is itself a retelling of that story. And some of these paintings have become paradigmatic precisely because of how they tell the story, but they tell it in visual terms. So, visual narrative as opposed to spoken narrative, poetic narrative. Today we're going to be encountering narrative fairly directly. So I just wanted to quickly remind you, of course, then I referred back to the oldest stories in the Western culture coming out of the Old Testament, we are going to spend some time with this story because we are going to spend a fair bit of time in ancient Egypt, and this is the story of Joseph in Egypt and its consequences, and I will argue that he can be placed in a very specific moment in time, in fact, in the late 12th dynasty, probably with the pharaoh Senwarset III and his successor, Amenemhat III. And if you want to know what Joseph actually looked like as an overseer of the pharaoh's agriculture, he probably looked like this. This was a sculpture that was, as I mentioned earlier, on exhibit in the Great Middle Kingdom show that just recently closed at the Met. And in his tomb, he would have been represented like this, another 12th dynasty official. Okay, and of course, our calendar. I did want to say something. I should have said it here. It's most of my dates that I will be using will be BC, before Christ, although as it's usually said today, before the Common Era. But the Common Era 0 point is the conventional date for the birth of Christ, so it amounts to the same thing. And in the Gospel of Luke, the birth is associated directly with a particular event instituted by the man represented in this sculpture, painted in Almatadama's great painting of Agrippa leaving an audience. And right, so you know that we move back, well, okay, so 100 BC is literally 100 years BC, but we move back, but we move forward by subtracting time. So the next year chronologically is 99, 98, 97, 96. This can be very confusing. I will be zeroing in on a couple of key dates. So for example, the year 1600 BC, or the year 1200 BC. So if you get confused, just again, feel free to ask. We normally don't think of time as moving numerically backwards, but as we move forwards, but that's how we deal with things. Two objects that are associated with Augustus fairly directly. This cameo, which was probably made for him, and which he may have even handled a few years before he died. He died in 14 AD. And this posthumous cameo, probably representing his apotheosis from about 20 AD. Okay, we look briefly at a few Roman things. I highlighted the fundamental fact of war in the ancient Greek culture. So we are easing into encountering the Greek world, which is our goal, before we go to the Ice Ages and even further back next week and the following weeks. So red figure and black figure paintings, or yeah, you can call them paintings. They're certainly paintings. Although they're made by incising lines in clay. The clay, the natural color of the clay, is the red. The black is the glaze. So here, originally, it was black against the red glaze. This is from the 6th century BC. And by the early 5th century BC, they reversed the figure ground. So the figures are drawn as black lines on the clay. And Athens was blessed, as I mentioned before, by some of the best clay for this kind of pottery anywhere in the Mediterranean. And so they became, their artists had Mediterranean-wide exposure. And our best surviving red figure and black figure vases actually come from Italy, from the Etruscans, who were very rich and wanted to be very Greek in culture, and so they imported the most expensive luxury Greek ware they could find, bronzes as well as clay, and these are mostly found in tombs. So this was introducing you to the first known historical painting, and I just wanted to show a few more figures in relation to this. This is from a red figure pot where the figures have been flattened out onto a single image, and it's not the Battle of the Amazons or the Battle of Marathon. But along that line, this is a reconstruction from the 19th century based on our one written source of what that painting may have looked like, with the gods in the uppermost register and then the Greeks and the Persians fighting in the lower three, more or less, registers. Okay, this was a big event. The date of the painting is around in the 460s BC, so about 20 years after, more closer to 30 years after the event in question. The Battle of Marathon is dated to 490 BC. And it was nothing like that movie that is playing up there, 300 and its progeny. Okay, so to reconstruct the painting, art historians have looked at vases such as this one, which represents a mythological narrative, Apollo and Artemis killing the children of Niobe. And this is the other side of that vase. And what I wanted to spend a little bit more time with, because one of you asked me what a stoa was, and I really should have said a little bit more, is this is where the painting was. So briefly, what is a stoa? We'll look at this stoa, the Stoa of Attalus. I did mention that by the Roman period, actually even before, 200 years before the Roman period, the center of Athens had already in effect become a campus, and Athens was preeminently a college town for the children of the rulers of most of the Mediterranean. And so one of the stoas was rebuilt in the 1950s, and here you see the far end of it, and way up there in the upper right-hand corner, I should go back, is the Acropolis. There you see the other end. This is the site of the Agora today. There we look directly at the stoa. Enough of it remained because it was built into a medieval defensive wall that it could be reconstructed with great accuracy. This is a two-story stoa. It's called the Stoa of Attalus. The donor was, in fact, an alum of the School of Athens and donated this building when he became king of Pergamon. There's the inside. So it's an interior public space, and it was used as a school because there were many schools, in fact, associated with Athens, and different teachers would have their classes, which were often no bigger than this, in various of the buildings surrounding the old Agora. And our building, well, we'll look at it in a moment. So this is just a plan in the section elevation of our stoa. And there you see it under construction in the mid-1950s. And it was the last possible moment this could be done because there were still people in Greece in the 1950s who were craftsmen in building marble buildings. And yes.
The fact that the fluting is carved in place is particularly noteworthy. It's a modern example of it. It's very rare.
Yes, yeah. It's very, very. I mean, really, this is. They were craftsmen who were part of a continuous tradition that goes back to Greek antiquity. So
So they don't have them anymore? So they're not there?
Well, they're relearning this in partially restoring parts of the buildings up on the Acropolis, but they're really relearning it. Which
Yeah,
is
point only was that, sorry, is that they were, this is basically built like an ancient building.
Yes,
They
it's literally built like an ancient building.
including
Yeah.
the way they built it.
Yeah, so if you see, there's no fluting in this photograph, but if we go back, so the columns are fluted or carved in situ after the building is assembled. They're not pre-assembled, so they're carved as if they're a giant sculpture. And doing this with any accuracy is no mean feat. So, okay, so that was that building. Our building is right here, the Stoa with the paintings, known as the Stoa Poikile. And in fact, those of you who recall that ancient Hellenistic and Roman school of philosophy known as the Stoics, I didn't mention this last time, this was their home base. This was their Stoa, and in antiquity it was known as the Stoa, because it was the first Stoa. So either the Stoa with the paintings, the Poikile Stoa, or just the Stoa. Okay, so a little bit more about where it is. This was a detailed drawing. We saw a photograph of this, and we now know that it keeps on going, so we don't know how long it is. There's that aerial photo I showed you of one end. And taken by one of these. This is an earlier photograph from the 1980s. Yeah, from the mid-1980s. It's a balloon photograph. You can see the line. It's tethering the balloon. And our Stoa is in the new excavations, which are right here. And as I mentioned, I participated in those excavations for about 10 years in the 1990s. They're right here. Here you see the city of modern Athens. Usually it's not even as clear as this. It's one of the most polluted cities in Europe. Okay, and this is from a very recent, kind of useful tool, Google Earth. So there's the corner of our Stoa, and it just keeps on going. So because this hasn't been excavated, we don't really know much of what went on in this part of the Agora. What we do know is another name for it early on was the Stoa of the Herms, because the Herms were concentrated here because they represented the threshold into the Agora. This is the Royal Stoa, actually a slightly later Stoa, which is right next door. Our Stoa is at the top. So the Royal Stoa down here, our Stoa right here. And because they found the position of one of the internal ionics about here, they now know that it keeps on going. So it terminates somewhere under there. Anyhow, so this was just some basic archaeology. This is a fragment from inside the Stoa, the internal ionic, a fairly well-preserved piece. May not look well-preserved to you, but for an archaeologist, because there's enough of it for you to reconstruct the entirety of the whole, and it captures something of its quality. For us, this is a well-preserved piece, because you can recreate it. And this is an elevation of that corner, because we have parts of the superstructure as well. Triglyphs, metopes, the Geisen, etc. And there's a rather lame digital reconstruction. Okay, now, what I didn't show you last time and I wanted to show you is we do have a painting from the late 4th century, dated, it's called the Tomb of Philip, or Philip II. It was found a few decades ago in Macedonia, in the vicinity of Thessaloniki, northern Greece. And but it can be dated because it's not Philip II, it's his son and Alexander's brother who succeeded him on the throne in Macedonia after he died. And it represents a lion hunt. And it is as well preserved, or almost as well preserved, as Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, which is to say that it's in terrible shape, but enough of it is there that you can reconstruct it. And for our purposes, Here is where it was found, under a mound, under a Royal Macedonian funerary mound, and it was painted on the facade, and it was painted in encaustic on plaster. So were it to have been painted like proper fresco, it would have been better preserved. Anyways, there's a photograph of it. So it's the tomb of Philip, otherwise incorrectly known as the tomb of Philip II. It's really the tomb of Philip III, not Alexander's father, but his brother. And I'm not going to show you all the incredible gold that was found in there. It's not our interest. It's the composition. And so one of the things that I will be talking about over today and the following day is large-scale composition and its importance to us to tell stories. A lion hunt. Here's just another drawing of the same composition. So what is now, okay, this is 100 years, about 120 years after the first monumental painting of the Battle of Marathon. That painting was a painting in which the young Phidias participated in. Either alongside his older brother or uncle, there's some confusion in the sources, and either the son of this uncle or this older brother, at the end of Phidias's career, painted paintings as a part of Phidias's Zeus, Olympian Zeus, in the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. So, Phidias the sculptor, who's most well known for the sculptures on the Parthenon to us, that we otherwise know as the Alguin marbles, began his career as an apprentice in the creation of the first monumental painting. And we also know him best for the friezes and the pediments, far less well preserved, the pediments of the Parthenon. So, monumental painting. So here's a reconstruction of that painting. You guys, or one of you guys, should take up the challenge of properly restoring this painting. It would be a very worthy enterprise, and not only would you become world famous, but you would learn a lot about ancient painting in doing so. Clearly, whoever did this reconstruction can barely paint. Okay, now we have a far better preserved replica of an ancient painting, also late classical, representing Alexander's first major victory over Darius III, the Battle of the I'm conflating two Greek names in my head, so I'm not going to try. But it's known as the Alexander Mosaic. It was found in Pompeii. Here's a rather lame reconstruction of it. It was found in the House of the Faun in this room, number 18. It was a floor in the House of the Faun. Here's another rather inept view through the atrium. So it was found back there in the first peristyle. Here's a far better view of the neighboring atrium in the House of the Faun, the late 19th century French academic, no, actually mid-19th century painting from the 1860s. They very cleverly placed the statue of Napoleon as a Roman emperor here. Anyways, it was found in this room, in this exedra. There's a window in this exedra, so as you stood in this peristyle looking down on the floor, you would see a view of the further peristyle. So, composition, yes.
Sorry, who was the French painter?
The French painter's name is, okay, I did write it down. Boulanger, 1861, Gustave Boulanger. Yeah, right. He actually won a prize at one of the salons for that painting. Okay, so another very worthy painting. This one we probably know the author of. So this is a replica of a painting that was commissioned by Alexander the Great sometime before 333, somewhere around there, BC.
So, Michael, you're saying the mosaic
Is a reproduction of a famous painting. Yeah, it is our best reproduction of an ancient painting. And as you can see, they were capable of painting horses in foreshortening and all kinds of extraordinary movement, chariots turning around in desperation. The Greek side is less preserved than the Persian side in this painting. But one of the ancient masterpieces, in fact, the only ancient painted masterpiece, for which we have, as I was talking about yesterday, an echo of an echo. Because whoever did the mosaic was probably working from a copybook. He was not working from the original painting.
Do we know how big the original painting would have been?
Yes, it's on a wall in the museum in Naples, and it's from the end of the drywall until the electrical.
Yeah, I've seen it. I saw it in Naples, but so that was the accurate size
Of the mosaic. We don't know the size
okay,
of the
so
painting.
that was my question.
No, but yeah. Okay, a charming view of, I just liked it, ancient Naples, the front door, what it would have looked like. Okay, this is a fragment of an ancient painting from a neighboring tomb, and it's Pluto taking Kore down to be his lawfully wedded wife, so to speak. Or Persephone, as the Romans called him, Hades and Persephone. Most of the surface has vanished of the painting, but enough of the drapery is preserved so that you can see that they were certainly accomplished not just in sculptural drapery, but in painted drapery as well as capturing motion in three-quarter foreshortening. So a surviving fragment of an ancient painting. So, and here we see painted architecture as well. I didn't mention that, the blues and the reds, will return to that. So anyhow, so back, I'll quickly, I talked a little bit about the naval side of the Greek reality being fundamentally the force behind their preeminence in the ancient world. It wasn't just their pottery, and this is the last image, so we can begin the second part of the presentation, and that's this one. So
let me check on the QuickTime, because, all right, it's still running. Okay. You wanted to access your second talk?
yeah, second talk. Thank you. That's that. It's already there.
Oh, all right.
So you just press on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. So we finished with Odysseus being a little too curious about the Song of the Sirens. As an introduction to what we'll be looking at today, you can call today's lecture something about Dionysus. The real focus is Greek religion and its consequences. Here, another great painting by Alma Tadema of the women of Missos, something like that, showing some religious event, let's just say, involving some degree of ecstasy or other. Okay, now ancient Greek religion certainly did involve moments such as that, but it was fundamentally pragmatic. It was all about saying thank you for the good things that are given to us, however mysterious the source may be. And the second part of that phrase is very important. The Greeks made stories about the powers that both gave and took away. The stories to them were secondary to the act of saying thank you. And the act of saying thank you is the act of performing a sacrifice. Now, the act of performing of a sacrifice can be more exactly defined as the act of giving away something which is very precious to you. Giving it away, alienating it from yourself in such a way that it can no longer belong to you. And the fundamental form of sacrifice, which you will discover in a couple of weeks, is very surprising, very old. Antecedents is animal sacrifice. So, animal sacrifice, you give away to the god something which is a source of sustenance. It's the most fundamental sacrifice. That an animal sacrifice has occurred can be seen from the fire on the altar. There's the stone altar. You can see blood has been sprinkled on the sides of the altar. Between the stone and the fire is the altar pan, which was made of bronze to protect the stone from the fire. And a libation is being poured as well. The libation can be the water from a sacred spring. It can be wine. It can be olive oil. It can be precious perfumes. But a liquid sacrifice. She's holding in her hand in a representative way where the knife is hidden for doing in the animal, and to sweeten the odors of the place, given that really it's probably smelled like a slaughterhouse at times, is an incense burning instrument here. So the burning of incense and perfuming the air was a part of sacrifice. Here you see a little beast about to be sacrificed. This is a pig, I believe. And as I may not have mentioned last time, I think I did, the beast has to assent to be sacrificed. Now, after the sacrifice, the beast is dismembered, and a part of the sacrifice is offered to the god on this wooden construction that we'll discuss at some point. You can see the tail, that's what this is representing. And a part of it is then roasted on the same altar and then shared among the celebrants who participated in the sacrifice. The carrying of pieces of branches is an intrinsic part of the ceremony, as is more libations. Also, this doesn't represent a single moment in time, but multiple moments in the sacrifice. Here's another example. There you can see the tail, much clearer, and the flames. And a big part of a sacrifice would have been music. A flautist, the flute is the most ancient musical instrument, as you'll discover, known to man, and is very much a part of these events. There you see the tail. Now, by the time we get to the Greeks, what they're offering on their altars are the long bones, the skin, the fat, the blood, the tail, the fatty tissue. The god does not get I'm trying to be colloquial, it's not one of my fortes. He doesn't get the beef, so to speak. He doesn't get the sirloin. He doesn't get the good meat that we like. This was a puzzle. This was a profound puzzle to the ancient Greeks, and they came up with the story of Prometheus tricking the gods into taking this part of the animal and leaving the muscle to the humans, because they didn't understand it. But the more important point is that this is what they offered to the gods, and I will return to this question in about 2 weeks. Okay, as a part of the liquid sacrifice, there you see the fiale, that's the ancient Greek term. It's the libation bowl. It's the standard sacrificial bowl, but not the exclusive one. Here's a terracotta fiale. The button this is the inside part of the bowl where the liquid is going to be, and you'll see what the button represents in a moment. We have a golden fiale at the mat, a deluxe fiale. This wooden, pardon?
How do you write?
Phiale.
Thank you.
So fiale. This is the famous golden one at the mat. This was itself an offering. Fiales could also be offered in a temple. They weren't just the instrument of making the libation. So this is the inside surface. This is the undersurface. It's so that you could put your two fingers to hold it between your thumb and your two fingers as you poured the libation so that it wouldn't fall. Making any error in an ancient Greek or Roman sacrifice involved doing it all the way back to the beginning. So errors were not permitted. And since some of these rituals could take an hour or so, it meant doing everything again. Now, this is very beautiful. This, I believe, is from the Met. This is the inside of a gilded silver fiale. And what do we notice if we compare the silver with the black figure? This is one of the big issues in black figure, and which may have led to the black figure, because silver, as it oxidizes, tends towards the black, and the golden parts don't oxidize. So, in fact, black figure pottery is the poor man's version of deluxe metal ware. This is quite superb. Sorry, red figure. That's, I meant red figure. Right. Red figure with the black representing the silver. Okay, so the act of offering. Now, one of the expectations or hopes in making the act of offering is what you see represented here. So what you see represented here is nothing less than a divine epiphany. Here we have Athena, undoubtedly Athena, who appears in the context of the altar. So divine epiphany. I'll talk to you a lot about divine epiphanies. One of the forms of divine epiphany is when the god speaks, and this is a 19th century painting. John Collier, Collier, representing the oracle at Delphi. She's sitting on a tripod, and whatever may have initiated her ecstasy, she is speaking with the voice of Apollo. Here we have Delacroix in the mid-19th century representing the same act, more in context where you see the offered lamb, and Apollo speaking through his oracle. He's been looking at red figure pottery, because Delacroix, because he introduces the sprig in the hand. And here we have our one ancient surviving image of the oracle. And we know it's the oracle at Delphi because she's sitting on the tripod. And here is the person that's speaking through her, Apollo, on his flying tripod. This is a fabulous red figure vase where he's flying over the sea with dolphins and other fishes, and he's playing on his kithara. There's just a flat drawing of the same. So, something about tripods. Tripods are, again, an item that we will return to, quite central to our enterprise of understanding what this is all about, but also a profound mystery. So remember the tripod, this is a coin from Delphi showing Apollo on the left shooting the python, who is associated with probably the Bronze Age site of Delphi, and we will be returning to it, and perhaps by some miracle, a part of the floor on which the tripod was situated has survived from the Temple of Apollo. This may very well be a part of it. What we know is the temple sits on a spring. The spring is a consequence of earthquakes in the bedrock, but it's a living spring. It's still functioning, and water was somehow associated with this ritual. And so that's why you see this, that's why it's very likely it's from the floor, this channel. And there's a hole in the floor because methane or some other gases also seem to have been released as a consequence of the particular geography. These are the remains of the Temple of Apollo. Much of the floor has been eaten out by the stone robbers from various Dark Age times. And we're looking down on the temple at the valley. It's really one of the most beautiful sites to visit, even today in Greece. And then looking down on the theater, the temple, the lower sanctuary, the gymnasium, and the running track are down here. The temple of Athena Pronoia further down. And this is another very rare vase. This is from southern Italy, showing the inside of the Temple of Apollo, set in the context of a play. And it's the Electra. Orestes has come in for sanctuary. There is Orestes. He is holding on to the omphalos, the navel of the universe, covered in this interesting garb. Artemis is right here, and the Furies are represented by this dark figure. And Apollo himself is getting ready to dispel the Furies from inside his temple. In other words, he's giving Orestes sanctuary. There's Electra. No, actually, I think this is the priestess, the oracle, and the tripod. There's I included that because it's not clear what this figure is. It's actually clothed, so they shouldn't have shown it entirely in black, the Fury, but with your snake. Anyhow, so Apollo, Artemis, temples, the mysteries of Greek religion. This is all very, we're flying over this at 10,000, well, more like 100,000 feet above the landscape, but just establishing a few bridgeheads, as it were. Here's Apollo, here's Artemis. Here is the representative figure of Artemis, the little, the female, the doe. And here's the representative figure of Apollo, the palm tree. And ultimately, Apollo is also represented by the prize that he won from Heracles. Here you have Heracles trying to steal the tripod. Here you have Apollo holding on to the tripod. So the tripod, a recurring figure. Another representative image of the tripod. Again, at Delphi, this is a later South Italian vase where the tripod is actually gilded in this vase. So our closing image of this section, Apollo, and Apollo showing how you are to worship him. In other words, this is very rare because this is actually a painting. It's not incised. It's on it's a white ground painting. It's actually from a bowl rather than a lithos. You see him on his folding chair in his sacred garments. You see the laurel in his hair. You see his tortoiseshell lyre, his raven. Apollo also speaks through the raven. And in pouring a libation, he's showing you one of the ways in which you are to offer worship to him. Okay. And ultimately, in a couple of weeks, you'll be able to relate that to this. This is a Bronze Age ring of an act of worship with the god in this image, probably Cretan, with the bird, the throne, and in this case, not a bowl, but showing how you're to offer using what looks to us like a wine cup. And you see a series of mythological beings in procession offering the same to this god. And a column that we will definitely return to. Okay, so something about Greek religion part 1, something about Greek religion part 2. Another great Alma Tadema painting. This one called A Reading from Homer. So, we have, well, it's fabulous to have a painting of somebody reading from an ancient scroll. There aren't that many paintings of that. And on top of being a fabulous painting. So a close-up of our reader. Now, for all the beauty of its recreation, ancient Greeks did not read Homer. They sung Homer. And this is a fabulous red figure vase from the Met collection of a kitharist singing an ode, some kind of poetic ode, in a competition in a sanctuary. So if you want to imagine how an ancient person would have received Homer, it wouldn't have been this sedate reading in this beautiful marble setting. It would have been by somebody in a condition of ecstatic song, more like going to the Metropolitan Opera and listening to one of the great singers singing. Now, okay, I say this quite deliberately because those of you who have an interest in opera will undoubtedly know that the opera, the form of opera, was in fact created in the Renaissance as an attempt to reimagine in its fullness what ancient Greek drama was like. And ancient Greek drama was accompanied by music and it was sung. It was operatic. Okay, and that comes to our something to do with Dionysus. So let's see how we're doing with time. It looks like we're just going to start here. The cult of Dionysus is also very old and very mysterious. Many people thought they had more or less figured it out in the late 19th, early to mid 20th century, until the name of Dionysus in the 1950s appeared in a Bronze Age context. And I don't need to give you too many details right now, but the importance is this. It was assumed that Dionysus, because the story of Dionysus is the story of the god who arrives from faraway places, that he must have arrived post the Bronze Age and therefore be a cult who somehow comes from the Far East, maybe even India, etc. But the name Dionysus in a religious context was found not just once in the 1950s, but yet again on mainland Crete, on the island of Crete, in the 1980s in another archaeological context. So now there's no doubt that the god Dionysus goes back to the Bronze Age. So the fact that he is the god who is arriving is a part of his religious meaning. It's not a historicizing of his ascent. Here you see him dressed as a mask on a tree. Here you see him again. The mask, the tree, and the dressing is a part of the cult and are in fact clues, as we'll discover in a couple of weeks when we visit this part of the Bronze Age, of how old the cult of Dionysus is. So the mask, the theatrical mask, is the making Dionysus present on the tree, which may precede the business of the mask as a vehicle for drama. So we'll end this part with the mask. This is a mask from Hadrian's Villa. In fact, a whole bunch of them from Hadrian's Villa, which are in the Pio Clemente part of the Vatican museums. They're used outside as ornaments, so they're in pretty rough shape. Here's a mosaic from Pompeii showing a mask. So you have masks both for tragedy. This is a tragic mask on the left, comic mask, and satyr. The satyr plays it is a part of the package on the right. And here we have the lady herself, the muse of drama, Melpomene. I have no real idea how the Greeks pronounced it, but it's spelled Melpomene, Melpomene. This is a statue from the Hermitage, and the preserved part of the statue is from here up, but she is standing, other examples of her show, standing on a rock, so this is correct. She holds a mask in her left hand, and she holds a club in her right hand, so she may be representing a Heracles drama in this context, but the rock represents the Hill of the Muses, Apollo's Hill of the Muses, which we will also have reason to visit in Boeotia, Mount Helicon. And although in the reconstruction they didn't put her properly, she also has tall shoes. So this is a reconstruction of, because actors went around not just with masks, but with elevated shoes as well. And so next time we'll begin with this vase representing actually not the moment of a play, but the after the play party, as it were. It was a victorious play. The playwright in the play is known, but I'll talk about that later. And the fact that it was a victorious play, a tragedy actually, is shown by the column with the tripod, because the person who paid for the whole production then wins a golden tripod, which they can then set up in a sanctuary. And the fact that this is a sanctuary is shown by this altar in the foreground. Okay, so something about Dionysus continuing next week. And since you have a class right now, we're going to terminate at 6 o'clock. So to be continued.
Thank you.